I used to deliver hotshot freight across the Great Plains in the Minnesota area, which is the term the industry uses for an immediate pickup and delivery with no additional stops in between. Basically, the highest priority delivery you can get. Most of the hotshot freight I used to deliver was replacement parts for machinery that had broken down. It might cost a machine shop a few $1,000s to ship a repair part on a hotshot, but that's far less money than they'd lose having the machine broken for multiple days. One night around 2 a.m., I was hauling across North Dakota, trying to reach Montana by morning. I was delivering a particularly valuable tractor part that a farm desperately needed for the following day. I began to notice some highway hypnosis sneaking up on me, but it didn't really bother me because I'd been through it hundreds of times before. Anyone who has driven across North Dakota knows that it's incredibly flat, like really flat. There also tends to be very straight and long roads. It's somewhat easy to see things on the roads that are far away, even at night. I noticed something long on the road, spanning my entire lane, approximately half a mile in front of me. I slowed down a little and prepared to move into the opposite lane, thinking it was a retread off of a blown tire. As I got closer, I noticed it was two people laying head to toe across the entire lane. I swerved into the other lane, successfully avoiding them, and came to an almost complete stop. But they didn't move, not an inch. I was just about to back up and check on them when I remembered a story that an old greybeard colleague of mine told me. He told me that in certain remote areas, people will lie down in the middle of the road and wait for a car or truck to stop and see what's going on. At that point, the road layers, along with whoever else is hiding in the nearby bushes, will beat the hell out of the driver and steal his vehicle, leaving him in the middle of nowhere. I decided not to back up, and when the two people in the road saw me put my truck back in gear and drive away, they both got up and walked towards the shoulder. I called the police and explained what happened, but we were so far away from civilization that I doubt anything came of it. Thanks to the old greybeard, I got to keep my truck, my job, and my teeth. I was driving a bus made out of a truck in the deserts of Central Australia. I was over 500 kilometers away from the nearest town, so yeah, middle of nowhere stuff. So I was on a 5-day charter to pick up a bunch of Aboriginal elder women to go and get their women's business health checks done. On the day I took them, we went via a place called Mintabi, so they could shop in the clothing and whatever store that's randomly in this little opal mining area of South Australia. We left from there quite late to make the 3 or so hour journey back to where we were all staying overnight. The next day, I would take them back to their respective desert communities. The passengers all fell asleep as they'd had a very long day, as had I, but that's my job. Even the nurse who was traveling with us fell asleep. So there's me, all alone in the cab of the Mercedes truck-derived bus, my 30 passengers all sleeping in the darkness of the passenger pod behind the cab, and it was around 9 p.m. Up ahead in the distance, I see a headlight coming towards me along the lonely desert dirt road. So I dip my lights so the spotlights go off and adjust to see only what low beam will show me. I drive down into a slight dip of a dry creek bed, expecting to see the car with only one headlight any time shortly. It's nothing unusual to see a car with only one headlight out there, so I'm not even remotely bothered. As I come out of the dip, I put my spotlights and high beams back on, and there is no car, no nothing, just the empty dirt road. There is no dust in the air, and I can see a good distance in front of me and out to each side. There was nothing there, just the empty desert, the dirt road, and me alone in the cab. I keep the lights on until we come to a stop about an hour later. I didn't see any cars or anything the rest of the journey. Before I let the passengers out, I ask if any of them saw the light, and they all go dead silent. And after a short while, they start talking in their own language, hurriedly, and then they all get off the bus. A few minutes later, a couple of the ladies come up to me to ask me to tell them exactly what I saw, without leaving anything out, and to describe exactly where I saw it. Now, I'm a big guy. I've lived on 3 continents. I've been a police officer, a teacher, bus and coach driver, truck driver, all sorts of things. Let's just say I'm pretty skeptical, but I do have an open mind. I'm not scared by much in this world. After I told these ladies everything from start to finish and described in minute detail exactly where it happened, I took note of exactly how far out we were when it happened. The 2 ladies looked at me with the whites showing in their eyes. They looked spooked, and they said, and I'll never forget the way they said it, I got on great with the indigenous people of Central Australia, and I trust that I know when something rattles them. They said this, "Driver, we are so lucky that you didn't stop, because if you did, no one would have seen any of us again. We'd all be gone." I asked why, and they shook their heads and said to not talk about it, because it had scared all the ladies. I'm sure many people have heard about the Min Min lights in Western Queensland. Well, whatever these ladies knew about whatever I saw in our location, they were convinced that it wasn't something you wanted to meet in the desert at night. I only ever saw this once. I only saw it for maybe a minute, and it just looked like a car headlight a couple of kilometers away up the road. But I'll tell you what, if the ladies that come from this area and whose people have survived in this desolate, remote part of the continent for 60,000 years are worried to the point of all being scared, I certainly don't want to mess with whatever it is. I was driving through eastern Washington on some state roads. There were no rest stops or cities, but I had done the route enough to know that there were these massive dirt areas every 40 miles or so where you could park safely away from the road. I decided to call it a night and close my blinds and laid down to watch something on my phone. After roughly an hour, I hear someone try to open the driver's side door. I haven't heard any vehicles on the roads the whole time I'm parked, but I get up to peek out the curtains. As I'm looking out into the blackness of the driver's side window, I hear them try the passenger side door. I peek out from the top of the curtain, but can't see anything, so I start the truck and kick on the lights. I'm fairly freaked out at this point, so I'm still not opening the curtains, but peeking through the gaps. Nothing. Nobody is standing near either of my doors or parked within sightline. I take a deep breath and close the sleeper curtains too, because for some reason that's going to make things better, right? After laying back down and convincing myself that something blew against the truck and it only sounded like the doors, it was fairly windy outside and a lot of flat ground. I hear what sounds like somebody trying to pry open the vents of the sleeper. The door handles start clicking again, and the truck starts shifting like someone is climbing on it. I hit the little alarm button in the sleeper, hoping to spook them off, but it does nothing but add to the noise of the door handles, fingers tapping on the windows and chassis, and the hiss of air coming out of the suspension. Then, it suddenly stops. A few moments where I can only hear myself breathing, and my heart pounding before I hear another truck approach and then drive by. I spend the next few hours waiting for whatever it was to come back, but it never did. In the morning, I couldn't find any footprints or damage to my truck, but on every window, there were tiny human-looking handprints, like a toddler had licked their hand and stuck it to my window over and over. Around 2006-ish, I was driving a flatbed, picked up a load of construction material, drywall, roofing, don't remember, but it was pre-packaged in boxes, and I remember having to use strap protectors on the load. This was in rural Tennessee. My memory's foggy now, but I want to say it was between Memphis and Nashville, but closer to the intersection of the Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee state lines. A tarp was required, so I strapped everything down, tarped the load, and left the shipper. About 5 miles down the road, in the middle of nowhere woods, on a 2-lane road, I noticed my tarp flapping in the wind. I found a wide shoulder and pulled over to fix it. I realized that I just flat out did a crappy job tarping this load and decided to redo it on the side of the road. I undo all the bungee straps, drag the tarps off, roll them back, climb up on the load, and start unrolling the tarps again, and I see a guy walking down the same side of the road I'm on, coming towards my truck. I don't think anything about it other than to keep an eye on him, because I'm in the middle of nowhere, and continue what I'm doing. About the time I have the tarp set in place, and I'm climbing down to start hooking the bungee straps back on, this dude is getting close enough that I'm now paying more attention to him than I am to tarping my load. I grab my winch bar and set it on the trailer where I'm working, just in case. It's an 8-pound solid metal bar, about 4 feet long, tapered to a blunt point on one end and hollow on the other, used for tightening straps and chains, etc. So the guy gets to me, and the first thing I notice is his hair. It's like a mullet, but it's patchy as hell, like he tried to cut his own hair and had a seizure in the process and said screw it, good enough to party. The next thing I noticed were his eyes, which I can only describe as off, like they were clear. I didn't think he was drunk or high or anything, but it also gave me the distinct impression that the elevator didn't go all the way up. Clothes were dirty and not well maintained, with dirty white tennis shoes. I remember he didn't have laces on one shoe, and the tongue was noticeably out of place. He stops by me, waits until I acknowledge him, and just says, "I've got a long walk." I'm like, "Yeah man, you do. We're in the middle of nowhere," making it clear that there's no ride to be had here. He nods, starts walking by me, continuing on his way, stops at about the driver door on my truck, and turns around, comes back to me, and repeats himself, "I've got a long walk." At this point I explain that I can't give him a ride, insurance and all that, apologize for not being able to help him out, and he seems to accept this, turns around and leaves. I wait for him to get a little ways away from my truck and start working on finishing the tarp job. I still keep an eye on him as he's moving away from me. As I'm putting on the last of the bungee straps, I look over to check where he's at, and he's turned around, heading back towards me, now about 100 yards in front of my truck, and coming back my way. It looks like he's talking on a cell phone, has his hand up to his face, and I can barely make out his mouth moving, his other hand waving like he's having a conversation. I finish with the straps, grab my winch bar, and I'm climbing into my truck as he's about 10 yards away now. Soon as I'm in the cab, I lock the doors and set the winch bar on the passenger seat, just in case. I look at the guy and realize he's not talking on the phone, he's talking to his hand. And now I'm nervous, because he doesn't look like he's having a nice pleasant chat. It looks more like an angry conversation. I crank the truck up, put it in gear, and just pull out. Didn't look for traffic or anything. As I pass him, he's just looking at me, still holding his hand to his face, with this dead-ass look on his face, just staring at me. Gave me the creeps. About the time I hit 5th or 6th gear, which is like 30 to 40 miles an hour on an 18-wheeler, I look in the mirror, and there's no one there. I think the best creepy thing that ever happened to me was that I was heading from Tucson, Arizona, up into Salt Lake City, Utah. Well, this was a few years ago, and the main highway had been taken out in a flash flood and was under construction, so I had to take a weird detour through the mountains in lower Utah. Well, it was getting late, and I was getting tired, so I pulled off onto the shoulder and went to sleep in my bunk. Now this was in the middle of nowhere. Closest town was like 40 miles away, so it was completely pitch black outside once I turned the lights off. Anyway, around 4 a.m., I wake up because I'm hearing something messing with my truck, like playing with the air and power cables between my cab and the trailer, which is literally 6 inches from where my head is at, but on the other side of the cab. Then I feel something climb onto the landing that's on the back of my truck, and it shakes my whole truck. So I'm guessing something around 200 to 300 pounds was climbing around back there. I'm thinking like a mountain lion or a bear. At this point, I'm wide the hell awake, and I want to get this thing away from me. So I slam my hand into my cab wall, trying to scare whatever is out there. I slam hard enough to really make it loud. I then hear someone, a male, scream bloody murder, and I hear them fall off the back of my truck. I then hear about 15 other people all around my truck yelling. I climb up front, turn on my lights, and illuminate a squad of army reserves doing their midnight ruck march and capture drills. Turns out, these guys were supposed to go and find an abandoned truck and secure it for their midnight drills. That truck was 3 miles back down the road. They were not expecting me to be sleeping there and thought I was part of the drill. I'm ex-military, so after explaining I was not part of their test and legit was just there out of coincidence, we laughed it off. They had to radio to their CO and tell him I was there and not have the other squads bother me. I'm an owner-operator, over-the-road trucker. In my time driving cross-country, probably the freakiest encounter I had was going through Cabbage Pass in Oregon. Let me set the scene. It's dark and late in the fall of 2016. I'm coming from Florida with a load of beer headed to Portland, Oregon. It's about 2 a.m. and it's cold out. I had just left a truck stop in Utah on I-84. I can't remember the name of it, but it has a Thunderbird as its logo and is probably on or very near a reservation. My wife and I had just gotten something to eat, and we were in the driver lounge enjoying an extremely late lunch. This is a common thing in the industry. Anyway, we get done and head back to my tractor. Everything seems like any other night. We get going and get into the pass. This is where things get strange. Ahead of me in the distance is another trucker. He's not moving terribly fast. My guess was a heavy load like mine. It's starting to snow a bit. As I'm putting up the pass, I get close enough to see the company logo. It's a Prime Ink rig. In my head I'm thinking, that explains the slug pace up the mountain. As close as I can get, I can't seem to pass him. A few turns up the pass and somehow I lost sight of him. Didn't think much of it at the time. The downside is the next couple of turns, he probably hit the grade and coasted down. Whatever. I get to the Oregon side of the pass and hit the pilot down there. My wife needs the toilet and we get stopped and head inside. I didn't see any Prime trucks in the lot. I figured he just kept going until I heard a Swift driver talking. He was saying a Prime driver was trying to run him off the road. Just about that time, an older driver starts talking. About 10 years before I even got my CDL, a Prime driver went over the pass near the top, a purple-black tractor. Well, damn, I saw a purple-black Prime tractor on the pass. Coincidence? Has to be. I say as much, then the old driver gives me a look. "Did you pass him?" asked the driver, to which I said, "I couldn't." He got pale. Now I'm getting antsy. What the hell? "Okay, driver, what the hell is going on? A purple-black Prime goes over the pass. What happened? Seems he lost control when he hit black ice and went off the top of the pass. He died. People have been seeing that tractor going up the pass and not seeing it on the other side, anywhere. Now I'm officially done with this conversation and was going to leave when the driver asked me if my CB was on. Well, no, it's 2 in the morning and my wife was sleepy. It would be kind of rude. The older driver tells me that that probably saved our lives. A few weeks beforehand, a fatal accident happened on the pass at the top on black ice. After talking to a driver on the CB, that was all the provocation I needed to never go over Cabbage Pass again. A ghost trucker? No thanks. We're a hard group of people to spook, but then our lifelines become liabilities. That's unsettling. I didn't get a lot of sleep for a couple of days. This stuff just freaked me out. I had to drive home from DC to Nowhere, Kansas, after getting off active duty. I didn't have anything but my car, some clothes, and my late grandpa's old service revolver to my name. Couldn't leave base until 5 p.m, which put me in West Virginia after dark. My GPS decided to transfer me between highways via a few back roads. In the meantime, it just quits working. No cell phone, no GPS, and it's dark in the boonies. I figured I'd call it a night and find my way out from my Atlas in the morning. I pull off the road, or path, lock my doors, put up sunshades on my windows to get some sleep. I was just dozing off when I hear footsteps on gravel. I perk up, and it's definitely something on 2 legs, and it's definitely getting closer. So I fumble to get my sidearm without looking while trying to peek out through the shade to see anything. Black. I can't see a damn thing. All the wildlife is silent, and I can hear footsteps circling the car. The back passenger handle pulled. Front. Driver. Driver rear. Hatch. Silence. I'm hoping they'll think it's abandoned and leave. I pull back the hammer on the revolver, and as soon as it clicks, there's a pounding on the hatch glass. I rip the sunshade down and see a man in an open plaid shirt going to town on my window with his fists and eyes that I've only seen on a rabbit right before slaughter. We lock eyes, and he just starts screaming. Not even words, just straight up screaming. So I scream back that I'll blow his head off if he doesn't go. He takes off to the rear of the car. I catch my breath, climb into the driver's seat, and start the car to get the hell out of there. Suddenly, my window just explodes into nothing. I later learned that broken spark plugs will do that, and he reaches in the car and yanks me out of the window. Terrified, I fall awkwardly as I clear the window, so I'm now on the ground. He's kicking the hell out of me, and I'm scrambling, trying to find the gun I dropped in the commotion. Seemingly out of nowhere, this random middle-aged guy comes charging out of the woods and decks this guy. They tussle a bit. I find the gun under the car. Crazy Guy 1 leaves, and I draw down on Crazy Guy 2. He puts his hands up, asking me not to shoot, and generally being rational. I ask what he was doing out here, and he said, "Well, I'm not here to screw spiders." Then explained that he's out here on vacation in a cabin. He heard screaming and came to help. I thanked him and got the hell out of there, found a Walmart a few towns over, and slept under a street lamp. I called my dad the next day to tell him that I'd be late because I had to replace a window, and explained what happened. When he heard the spider thing, he laughed and made a joke about his dad always saying that because he had a bunch of Australian pilot buddies. Apparently, it means like, the hell does it look like I'm doing? Now, my grandpa died before I was born, and I'd actually never seen a photo of him aside from a service photo when he was about 20. So I get home, and I go to put Grandpa's gun back in Dad's lockbox. I almost crapped my pants when I see a photo inside of my dad with the dude that saved me, down to the clothes. I flip it over, and it's got my dad and Grandpa's names on it, dated 1990. So I asked my dad about the picture, and he says it's special because that was taken the morning of Grandpa's accident. I'm not saying I believe in ghosts, but it's a really messed up coincidence that the guy who saved me from a tweaker is a dead ringer for the guy whose gun I was trying to grab to protect me. A couple of years ago, I was running through the Plains states. It was about mid-afternoon. I'm hauling ass on I-80 because I gotta get something to Utah in a hurry. For anyone not versed on the interstates in the Plains state, they are very flat and very boring. While driving this very flat and very boring part of I-80, I get a whiff of burning tobacco. I hadn't smoked in over a year at this point. I had ozoned my tractor cab. I knew that smell wasn't from me or my stuff. I'm also doing nearly 80 miles an hour. One of the perks of owning your tractor is that you can turn off the speed governor. I knew I couldn't possibly have caught that smell from another vehicle. The smell just vanishes. That was weird. I let it go and try to stay alert and awake. Highway hypnosis is real. About 10 minutes later, I smell it again. Right about then, my wife starts having a mini freak out. She goes, babe? Yo, when did we pick up a Cherokee Chief? I chuckle and say, I don't have a passenger endorsement, so he's gonna have to sit in the back. He already is. Come again? There's a Cherokee Chief looking guy sitting on the top bunk. What the hell are you talking about? Just look back here for a second. To entertain her, I looked. I shouldn't have looked. There's this guy, big-ass headdress, wearing a bearded breastplate, buckskin leggings, the works. I go, what the hell? See? I think we need to stop for a bit. I'm hitting the next rest stop. I take the nearest exit, and no sooner than I do that, the quote-unquote ghost just poofs the hell out. Tobacco smell again. It was more of a, that was weird and freaky, than actually dangerous or threatening. One does not expect to get a second passenger while moving at 80 miles an hour. I also started keeping a full thermos of coffee in the cab. I want to say it was highway hypnosis, but my wife wasn't driving. There's no way it would have affected her. This happened to my grandfather and his 3 cousins in southern India around the 1960s at the Coorg-Hassan border, where they were returning home after attending a party. They lost their route in the middle of the night and entered a forest area and encountered with tribals. They tried to talk to them and asked for a way out. As tribals had little knowledge about local languages and they responded, tribals looked kind and generous. They told everyone to stay because it's not safe to travel at night. Everyone agreed because these tribals were kind. They offered everyone food. The food was delicious. He told me it was the tastiest meat he ever ate. Everyone liked it. After some time, my grandfather noticed something in his plate where it looked like a nail of a human toe, and he panicked. Then his cousin observed a thumb in his plate and confirmed it was human meat they were given. Grandpa and his cousins acted normally, finished their dinner, and asked them where they could go for nature's call. The tribals looked at each other, and one of them took ropes from the roof of the hut and tied it to everyone, and then let them go to the toilet next to a tree. Grandpa and his cousins opened the knots for each other and tied it to the tree and ran away. They didn't stop until they found a town. I was driving on a cross-country road trip through the middle of nowhere, Kansas, when I had one of my tires blow out. I pulled over and went to call AAA, but I had no service on my phone, so I got out and started the process of trying to change the tire myself. After a very short while, a cop pulled up and asked if I needed help. I said yes, thank you, officer, and he said, "'Cause you're in luck. I just so happen to know the best tow truck driver. He could take you into town and you could get all fixed up, no problem. The mosquitoes were eating me alive, and frankly, I only had a donut-style replacement tire and no clue how to properly change it. So I said, yes please, and the officer gave the tow truck a call. After another short while, the tow truck arrived and the officer left. The driver asked, where am I towing you to? So I was like, I'm not sure, to town I guess, somewhere where I can get my tire fixed. He said, well you're in luck, because I know the guy at the only place that's open right now who can fix that for you. I said, sounds good, and he towed us to the auto repair place. This was basically a ghost town, if you could even call it a town. The tow truck driver and the repair guy sat around and talked for a couple of hours while my tire was being fixed. Bear in mind there was nobody else there but me and my passengers. There was nobody else anywhere within sight. The town was empty, except for the gas station connected to the repair place. Finally, they came out and said I was all set and gave me both my bills, one for the repair and one for the tow. $1,200 in total for one tire and a 5-mile tow for a 1991 Grand Am that wasn't even worth that much. I was furious, but had no options, so I gave him my credit card, and he was like, sorry guy, we're a cash-only kind of town here. I was like, okay then, well I don't have any cash on me, so how are we going to settle this up then? And he was like, well, you're in luck, because there's an ATM next door at the gas station my buddy owns. So I went to the gas station and took out the maximum I could on 3 or 4 different cards, each with a $20 withdrawal fee. I looked behind the counter, and in addition to the gas station attendant, there stood the cop, the tow driver, and the repair guy, all munching on Doritos and having a good laugh. I'm pretty sure I got hosed, and potentially, maybe even sabotaged. Looking back, the cop sure arrived really quickly, and my other 3 tires were all still relatively new. I had to cut my trip short and invest in cortisone cream for the million mosquito bites. I was running through California one night, SR-58 to be exact, and started to get sleepy. I pulled out on the side of the road and decided to take a nap. The load I was picking up got rescheduled, so I decided to just hang out where I was until it was closer to my normal drive time, which was at night. I was starting to learn how to do astrophotography, and where I was parked was a pretty decent spot. Nice and dark, not a lot of traffic at night, so I decided I would try and practice some shots. I climbed up onto the top of my trailer, just above my reefer unit on the edge, and sat there learning how to do aperture settings and all that. All of a sudden, I hear a noise coming from the brush directly below me. I felt pretty safe in the knowledge that no animal was climbing up 13'6" high of a trailer. I picked up my flashlight and started looking around the ground for the sound, but to my surprise, I found absolutely nothing. So I wrote it off to wind and went back to figuring out camera settings. About 2 minutes later, I hear it again, this time a little further down my trailer, so I shined my flashlight out there again. Yet again, nothing, just brush. By this time, I was starting to get concerned about what I was hearing. The sound I was hearing didn't sound like a small animal, but more like someone moving around below me. The passenger door to my truck was locked, but I left the driver door unlocked, and since I was sitting close to that side of the trailer, I could see if anyone was going to approach it. I turn my light off and go back to what I was doing. About 5 minutes later, I hear someone say, "Hey!" My heart jumped into my throat. I grab my light, stand up on the trailer, and start frantically looking around the edge of the truck. Not a goddamn thing. Nothing. Same as it was before when I searched around with my light. I remain as quiet as possible, still looking around the brush with my light. Whoever was out there, I didn't want them to hear how panicked I was. It felt like time was standing still in this instance because it was pitch black out and no car or truck had passed me in over an hour. Roughly a minute had gone by and I heard my trailer door handle unlock and release. Now, thankfully, I was empty, so there was no load for anyone to steal. But they didn't open the door. Whoever it was unlocked the trailer door and stopped, as if to draw me to the back of the trailer. I had no time to think about what I was going to do. I snapped out of my panic freeze, jumped down to the catwalk, the walkway back to the cab of the truck, and hit the ground as fast as possible. I jumped in the truck, unlocked the door, fired up the truck, and took the hell off as fast as I could. I drove for about 5 minutes, rarely taking my eyes off my side mirror to see if I was being followed. I felt like it was safe enough for me to pull off and close the door of the trailer. At this point, I'm trembling because of the pure adrenaline running through me. I stopped the truck as fast as I could, bolted to the back, shut the trailer door and locked it. I got back in the truck and left the area as fast as possible. To this day, I still don't know what the hell this person was doing or what their end game was. I never stopped there again after that. Gave up trying to learn astrophotography too. This happened some 15 years ago, as I was driving back up north from Newbury in the UK. For late night driving trips, I always operate a buddy system just in case. My friend had taken his rest and woke up about 45 minutes before time to set off. I checked the weather forecast. Heavy fog due across the M1 at around 2 AM, just as I would be hitting that part of the route. Damn. I asked my buddy if we can set off half an hour earlier to skip it. He agrees, and we set off. We're doing good time thanks to the lack of traffic, but I can see the fog line appearing. It gets thick, fast. I take a look at the clock, 1:30 AM. Damn weather forecaster's got it wrong again, I think to myself. I ask my buddy to stay alert in case I miss something, as I'll be concentrating dead ahead. I have to slow to about 35 to 40 miles an hour from 70 because visibility is basically nil, but stopping the car would be suicide if there's anything behind me. Based on my position, I know there's a service station in about 15 miles, so I'll turn off there and wait it out. The fog starts getting really thick, to the point where I'm thinking maybe it's actually safer to stop. I can't see the road or the cat's eyes at this point. I pull to the left slowly and wait for the telltale feel of the hard shoulders rumble strip. It didn't come, nor has the car hit a ditch. At this point, I'm a bit freaked out as I have no orientation and I can't see the road. I'm down to about 15 miles an hour as my buddy says, "Hey, there's a light in front of us." It's a green light, which is odd for the motorway, but maybe I can see what's going on from there. I pick up a little speed and head towards the green light. As I'm driving forward, the fog begins to lift and I realize where we are. At an intersection of Beverly Road and the A63, the green light was a traffic light. I pull the car over and we both say to each other, "What the hell?" This is approximately 150 miles from where the fog started, a good 2.5 hour drive away. I look at my watch, 1:50 AM. I take a look at the radio clock in the car, 4 AM. I get my phone out, my buddy gets his phone out. Both say 1:50 AM. As I look in the rear view, there's no trace of fog behind me. Both of us are quite freaked out at this point, so we decided to find out which clock is right. I drive to the station, 4:07 AM. To this day, I have no explanation, and neither of us can account for the missing 2.5 hours, nor how I managed to do multiple lane changes and junctions to get from the M1 to the M62 and then the A63. My uncle used to drive a truck from Northern Europe down to Iraq in the 80s, when the Saddam regime was trying to modernize the country and spending loads of money importing industrial equipment and foreign experts. Driving down to Iraq meant going through Turkey, because going through the Soviet Union was absolutely not an option. Taking the Turkish route was ridiculously dangerous because at the time, Turkey had no social safety nets, and they had just experienced some kind of economic collapse, which left millions of people unemployed, homeless, and destitute. In certain regions of Turkey, these desperate and starving people set up huge tent cities and shanty towns along the roads, hoping that some kind of opportunity passing along the road would provide them with some kind of wealth or at least a meal. But being desperate, they would often resort to banditry in an attempt to get some cash. One of their favorite methods was stopping foreign trucks, killing the drivers, and just stealing everything. They did anything and everything to stop these trucks, then just descended on them like a swarm of ants attacking a larger animal. The most common method was bandits placing large objects in the middle of the road. Foreign drivers were instructed to never stop and to just ram their way through obstacles. When the bandits realized this, they started kidnapping children and shoving them in front of the trucks to make the drivers stop. Again, foreign drivers were instructed to just floor it and keep going, because if they stopped, they'd almost certainly be murdered. Another common issue was police corruption. The Turkish police would often stop foreign truck drivers and just rob them at gunpoint, because the cops knew that drivers carried large amounts of cash to pay for food, fuel, etc. Other times, the police would make truck drivers follow them to secluded areas where they would murder the truck drivers and steal the truck. Another thing they'd do was kidnap foreign drivers by arresting them on made-up charges and demanding huge amounts of money to free them from jail. So haulage contractors instructed their drivers to never stop for Turkish police and to ram police cars if necessary. My uncle said he had to ram his way through obstacles on the road a few times, but he refuses to talk about whether or not any of those obstacles were alive or not. I'm pretty sure he got PTSD from this, but he'd never admit to it. At the time, I was working for a 3-letter, formerly great tech company doing retail point of sales upgrades. One of the techs that had been on an overnight job had suddenly gotten sick and they needed an extra hand in the middle of the night. And I like money, so I went out there in the middle of the night to a site maybe 70 miles away. It was between 1 and 2 a.m. and I'm going down roads I wasn't familiar with. Right before I go around a bend on an empty 2-lane highway, with of course no streetlights, and road cones are sort of haphazardly set up to start to block off the left lane. I'm in the right lane, so I don't mind, but it was weird that there was no warning signs or anything. And then what seemed like a quarter mile down the road, there is a car just stopped in the right lane that I was in. I slowed down and nearly at a stop because I'm a dumb teenager who didn't realize what this was, and out of the car step out 2 dudes and start walking towards my truck. Well, I start to nope right out of there and run over a cone to get away. One dude tried to jump in front, but I got around him and sped off down the road. The traffic cones had stopped right where the stopped car was. I'm already a very anxious person, so after the panic and adrenaline wore off a few miles down the road, I called the cops to report what happened. Headlights appeared on the horizon behind me, which caused me to panic even more. I told the 911 dispatcher that I thought I was being followed, and I pulled off at the next exit because it had a gas station. I pulled off, and the car behind did too. My heart was slamming in my chest as I pulled up the pump and sprinted into the store, only to find that the car that had pulled in behind me was a completely different car than the one that was stopped in the road and had a small woman driving it who had gotten out to pump her gas instead of the 2 dudes that had jumped out of their car. After I collected myself and told the dispatcher it was someone else, I went out to ask her if she had seen the car stopped on the road after the cones. The lady pumping her gas says she had seen the cones, but there was no car stopped on the road when she passed by. 15 minutes later, a cop came by the station to take my statement about it and said that they had gotten a similar report a couple of weeks prior, but that was about it. I never heard back about if the cops found anything or not. So, I'm an over-the-road truck driver in America. I generally stay in the Midwest as I enjoy the open road and less traveled areas. I tend to drive at night because the roads are a lot more empty and there tends to be less traffic and construction going on around that time. Around this particular night, I was in Kansas making my way to Wyoming. I drive for hours at a time non-stop, so before I drive, I stack up on food and drinks. I've accustomed my bladder to hold going to the bathroom after years of truck driving until I can't hold it anymore. Now in Nebraska, I get the urge to pee, so I start finding part of the road that I'm going to be able to pull over safely without damaging my tires. But this is the backwoods of the country, so finding this would be a little hard, but not impossible. When I finally feel that I've found a perfect enough location, I pull over. Since I'm in the middle of nowhere, I have nowhere to pee, besides an empty gallon that contained water, because there's no way I'm stepping outside in the dead of night. As I'm doing my business, I hear a tap. I do want to make it known that I travel in my truck alone. I don't have a partner on the truck, nor a pet of any kind. The truck radio is off, the windows are up, and all you can hear from my perspective is the hum of the truck running. I begin to look for the sound, which at first I thought was my mini fridge, because when it gets unplugged, the melted water from the freezer will leak out and start making a patter noise on the floor. I checked, and it wasn't that, and in realizing this, the tap sounded more like a small rock hitting the side of the truck, the driver's side in particular. Within my truck, I start to look outside of the driver window, but don't find anything in particular. So I start to look out of all of the windows. I don't see anything anywhere, so I start to think it could be the truck itself. I get back in the driver's seat and get out of the truck to look under the hood. As I'm about to step out, another small rock hits my door, and I look out into the side of the road where in the field stands these tall corn stalks. Keep in mind, corn stalks are tall as hell. I mean, I'm standing on the top step of my truck and I can see right above them, and in looking out into the darkness, I see the top of someone's head. Just the top, not even a forehead, just their hair, which was black. The average height of a cornstalk is 8 feet, so I don't know about you, but whoever that was had an advantage. I get back in the truck and lock the doors, put the window down a tad bit and yell, "Hey, you need help?" No answer. "Hey man, you good?" No answer, so I say screw it and put the truck into gear and haul ass. I don't even look back, just try to get away from them and the area as fast as the truck will go after being at a standstill on the side of the road. I drive for hours until I reach Wyoming and pull over at a truck stop to get some sleep. Before heading to sleep, I go inside the truck stop to get some food, and as I'm coming back to my truck, I see marks on the back of the passenger side of the truck, as if someone had keyed my truck. I start angrily looking around to see who it could have been, but can't really come to a conclusion since most of the other drivers weren't in their front seat. Then I start looking around my entire cab and notice the marks are also on the back of the cab near the platform where the cab and trailer connect. I start remembering about the person I saw in the field and thought it was them, but I don't remember seeing anyone hop on the back there, so I was left puzzled. Nothing else happened to me for the rest of the day, thankfully, so I'm not sure who the person was, or what they wanted, or what their intentions even were, but I'm glad I never ended up finding out. It was about 2 a.m. passing through rural Texas, making a heavy machinery delivery. The route I was taking to this farm was through rural Texas. You know, the type you see in movies that involve a farm in the middle of nowhere type stuff, and a house every 2 miles type deal. And little did I know, this route I was going to take was about to lead to the scariest, freakiest experience I've ever had, hands down. I have LED light bars on my truck all over the front, so when there's no oncoming traffic, I can see literally a mile. So I'm driving down the road, minding my own business, when I can see something off in the far distance with my lights. And the closer and closer I get, it looks more and more like a person. About 200 yards from what appears to be a person, I can make out that it's a girl, because of the long hair and light-colored clothes she has on. So I slow down as to not scare this girl walking in the road, and turn my brights off so I don't blind her. The truck lights are bright enough as is, so I could see her just fine without it at this point. As I get closer, she turned, and when she did, my CB radio started making some slight static, and as I passed by, I swear she had absolutely no face at all. It looked like a hollow shell. I'm getting antsy just talking about this. I've never flown through gears so fast in my entire life, especially with a heavy load, and I had to be doing at least 70 before I finally came back to my senses. I called the police about it, and the worst part was, they said I'm not the first person to call this in. Through the years, they've had people call this in with similar descriptions of a girl walking down the road in the early morning hours, and when she turns, she has a hollowed out face. The sheriff and I talked, and told me about an accident that happened years back. A girl in her 20s was struck and killed by a truck speeding down that road in the early morning hours, and it dragged her so far down the road, it ground her face down to nothing. And she was described as having long hair and wearing light-colored clothes, the exact same description as I saw that night. Needless to say, I'll never be taking that route again if I have another delivery. Ever. I used to drive a truck around the town I used to live in northern Alberta, as a bylaw officer. I would respond to alarms in the city, schools, banks, car dealers, offices, just any sort of business you can think of. One time I was leaving a school alarm, and as I was leaving the school in my truck, I saw the bushes move, and a guy comes screaming out of the bushes, waving me down, clearly in distress. Now, I care about people, and I was instantly concerned about this person, so me being concerned, I turned around and rolled down my window, asking him what was wrong. His screaming reply was, "You need to let me in your truck. People are trying to kill me." He repeated that a few times, while I also repeated, "I can't let you in due to insurance reasons and all that." The truck I drove didn't automatically lock the doors as you drive, so after a few seconds, it clicks that this guy was clearly about to forcefully hop in, and my doors were not locked. At this point, I was extremely anxious, and fiddled with the buttons as I was too anxious to really concentrate. I managed to lock them. Not 10 seconds after, he tries the handle. Once he realizes he's not getting inside, he leaves the window, and next, I hear and feel he's hopping into the box of the truck. After he's chilling in the box, I hear him yell, "They're right behind us! Drive!" So I'm not risking my life. Whether this guy is out of his mind, high off his rockers, I'm not letting this guy kill me, or the people he claimed was trying to kill him. The police station was only a 3-minute drive, so I bolt there, and as I'm on my way, I call 911. I notice as I'm about to reach the police station, the cars make quick turns away, and there's police officers waiting outside. The guy hops out of the box before I'm even parked, and runs inside. I get out, and an officer meets me as I'm exiting my vehicle, and asks me to explain what was happening. They need to take an official statement from me, so I'm sitting there waiting. The other cops talk to this guy. After he's done rambling about how dangerous these guys are, the officer asks, "Sir, have you drunk any alcohol? or did drugs tonight? He responds with, yeah, I drank and did some crack. Anyways, after that, I assume it's all cleared up. I do my statement and leave, and finish my shift. Next day, I wake up for my next shift. I lived with my sister at the time, so she's already up and asks me, there was a death last night. Apparently, a guy got his arm cut off and his head caved in. 5 minutes after she tells me this, I get a call from the police station and they ask me to come in and give another statement. As I'm driving, my head is flooded with thoughts and anxiety. I get to the police station and they tell me, so we take it you've likely already heard about the murder last night. And I said, yeah, about 30 minutes ago. The police did say the death was likely drug related, but told me it wasn't the same guy. To this day, I still wonder and pretty much assume that even if it was, they wouldn't tell me that anyway. But considering someone got killed, not hours after I deal with a drug-related issue, I figured I'm one of the best leads they have, even if I wasn't directly involved with this person. Oh yeah, work called me and checked the cams in the truck. Needless to say, they weren't happy with the fact I drove with the guy in the box of the truck. Regardless of that, I chose life over a job. I like to accompany my stepfather in his truck from time to time. This one time, we were on this curvy road of just trees, not a house, not even fences on the land behind the trees. As the hours pass, I start seeing a man, white rubber boots, which were dirty, a vertically striped light blue button shirt, a blue cap, and cloth bag hung from his right shoulder, and a long-ass machete hanging from his dusty jeans. I don't know why I remember him so clearly. For some reason, as we got closer and closer, he was just the same distance. I said, hey, we should offer him a ride. It's an empty road far from any town. My stepdad looks over and says, who? There's no one other than you and me. I said, there is. Look over there in front, the man with the light blue shirt. This kept on for a few minutes back and forth, until the man just disappeared. I said to myself, oh good, probably just my imagination, until blood spots start appearing on the road. I decided not to tell my stepdad, because I thought it probably was just an animal which got hurt, or my imagination playing with my boredom, but it never ended. And what made it worse is that when I asked to stop for a second to take a whiz, the man appeared again. Only difference was, it was on the opposite direction. I said to myself, oh for goodness sake, not you again. I decided not to pay any attention to it, and just carry on with my business. When I finished, the man was running towards me, and kept getting closer and closer. I got scared and jumped hastily back inside the truck and told him to start moving because the man was coming. He laughed and told me I was crazy and that there's nobody. The blood stopped after a few kilometers away, and it never came into my mind after that, until my mum told me about seeing the same man and the same blood trail on a similar road. A friend of mine was getting into her car after work one evening when a guy approached her. He was wearing a shirt and tie and looked pretty respectable. He told her that his car had broken down and he needed to get into town to call the garage. This was before mobile phones were really around. He seemed friendly enough, so she decided to give him a lift. Anyway, 5 minutes into the journey, she realized what she was doing and decided that this might not be such a great idea. She pulled up on the side of the road and told the guy that she thought one of her headlights was out and would he mind getting out to check. He obliged, and as soon as he got out of the car, she drove off. She arrived home feeling a bit guilty for leaving him at the side of the road. As she was getting out of her car, she looked at the passenger footwell and realized she had driven off with his briefcase still in the car. She felt awful and drove to the police station to tell them the story and hand over the briefcase. They accepted the story and took the briefcase. Later that evening, she received a phone call. It was the police. "We need you to come into the station to make a statement," they said. Turns out, they opened the briefcase to try and find some form of identification. They only found 2 items in there, a rope and a knife. As far as I'm aware, they never found the owner of the briefcase. My dad has told me this story a few times. On the reservation, there were only a few streetlights in the late 80s. No glowy twilight from the city, so it was lit by starlight. Patrolmen are part of a small group responsible for multiple districts in southern Arizona, so sometimes they would have partners, sometimes they spent their shift by themselves, and sometimes they could meet up if it was a particularly quiet night. These districts were pretty far from each other, so what you think of as neighborhoods often are a few roads with houses very far apart, which gives lots of room in the dark for trouble. Patrolmen are responsible for cruising the back roads, listening to the radio, and would break up parties and look for suspicious individuals, look for fires, etc. My dad was driving back roads and came upon a trailer that was lit up and looked like a bunch of people were inside. He drove by, made sure that no one was causing trouble, noting maybe 15 people max could fit inside, and drove on. Around the curve, he said he had his headlights on and could see a car up ahead, facing him, with the headlights off. Sometimes cars were abandoned, and patrolmen would have to check license plates and see that it was empty. Arizona is a one-plate state, meaning the law doesn't require a front license plate. As my dad approached, maybe 25 feet away, he said he couldn't see into the car, even with headlights shining, but definitely saw bright, white hands on the steering wheel, almost as if someone was wearing white gloves. Here's how he told it. They looked like magician's hands were gripping the steering wheel. As I came within 10 feet of the car, I saw the fingers flicker, as if whoever that was knew I was trying to see them. I slowed down. I'm passing within 4 feet of the car, when I look into the driver's side and can see the shape of a head looking straight forward. As I'm right beside the car, driver's side to driver's side, in a flash, the shape turned its head and smiled, an ungodly wide smile, bright as starlight and as large as a watermelon slice. Its skin was stretched back around its tall white teeth. It kind of reminded me of The Mask. You know that movie? My dad snapped his head forward and drove a wide circle around the car to see the license plate, and there was none. On the passenger side, the back door was broken off and shone his light inside to make sure there was no one else in the back seat. He no longer saw the person inside. He took a description of the car and as quickly as possible returned in the direction he came from. He watched the rearview mirror, hoping whoever that was would not chase him, even though, in retrospect, he assumes the car was not functional, which makes it creepier. Who sits in a broken down car in the middle of the night? They couldn't have known he was on his way and couldn't have planned on scaring him the way they did. It did. He said he was returning to familiar ground and saw the trailer up ahead, dead quiet and dark. He was able to shake it off until he saw that the trailer was boarded up, windows broken, and looked abandoned for years. He radioed my uncle to see where he was, and, always the older brother, wanted to go check it out for himself. And my dad begged, "Please just don't go until the morning. I'll go with you." My uncle confirmed it was an empty, boarded up trailer, and an abandoned, empty car that looked rusted and busted, and always calls my dad silly names when I asked them to tell me that story. A few years ago, I was visiting a friend in India, in the rural stretches of Maharashtra state, north of Nagpur. He's Indian, and since I'm not, He wanted to show me all the cool things about where he was born and raised before we met in university in England. He told me there was a village about 50 kilometers away from where we were into the bush that had the best food of anywhere he's been, and he wanted to share it with me. We left around sundown and drive into the night as it got darker. As we were driving, we came upon a few abandoned structures at what looked like an intersection. It was September and still very warm and humid, but as we entered that place, the temperature went ice cold, and I swear that I could see my breath. I was overcome with the feeling of impending doom and that there was a malicious presence surrounding us. I sat there in silence, just thinking that maybe I was weirded out by a place that I'd never been before. My friend was silent for a minute, but then whispered, "This is a bad place, an evil place. I can't explain it, but I think many have died here." That just about made me jump out of my skin. We approached the intersection of another road, and we had to maneuver around a cart in the middle of the road. As we did, I swear I felt ice-cold fingers reach through the closed window. The steering wheel of the SUV jerked, and we scraped against the cart on the driver's side. My friend instinctively stopped for a moment, as anyone would if just in an accident. What happened next still haunts me when I think of it. As the SUV rolled to a stop, I looked out the windscreen and there was an entire group of villagers dressed completely in white. They seemed to hover over the street instead of actually stand on it. Their eyes glowed the way that photos used to come out with red eye, and I immediately began crying, and I seemed to be overcome with an ocean of sadness, anger, and just plain terror. My friend put the vehicle in reverse, turned around, and we never went to the village we were trying to reach. We didn't talk about it that night, but in later conversations, he said that the ground is old in India and it holds thousands of years of memories, and you can never be sure of what happened in places. I don't want to think of what happened in that place. It was as close to hell as I ever want to imagine. I spent lots of time driving forestry roads for fun with friends. There's been a couple of times we've encountered some strange things. There's one that really sticks out with me though. 5 years ago, my buddy and I were taking a course at a college a couple of towns over. He stayed at his grandma's place during the week because it was closer to the school. I'd pick him up in the mornings on my way into school. His grandma's house was kind of on the outskirts of town. There was a pretty large forestry road like 10 minutes from her house that we knew about, but didn't know where it led to. One night, I stayed at his grandma's house with him while she was away, and we decided we would go drive this road to see what was up there. So we're driving this road for about half an hour and come to a dead end. We get out and look around and see some strange lights up in the distance that kind of look like they're going in a circle. After factoring out that it's not a UFO, I realize that it's a major highway and that the lights are actually headlights of cars. We figure this forestry probably ends up leading to this highway, so we head back a little bit and then take another road that branches off. After driving this same road for about an hour now, we round this corner and I see this guy standing on the left side of the road, up in the distance. For whatever reason, I distinctly remember what he was wearing. He was wearing a blue t-shirt with khaki cargo shorts, and he was facing us. I say to my friend, "What the hell is this guy doing?" He says, "I don't know, probably just camping or something." As we get closer, he just vanishes, like blink of an eye, and he's gone. My friend was driving, and he slows right down and doesn't say anything, and he's looking at where this guy was standing. He then looks over at me with a really worried and scared look and says, "Where the hell did he go?" I shrugged. I was too creeped out to say anything. We continued on for about 5 minutes down the road. We find a burnt car in the ditch. By now, we're both super creeped out and hardly speak 5 words the rest of the drive. The road we were on eventually led to the highway we thought we saw earlier. On the drive home on the highway, the truck was shaking pretty bad and randomly pulled hard to the right. I put it up on the hoist the next day and took the front wheels off and found that the top ball joint on the passenger side was only held on by one of 3 bolts, and even that bolt was barely hanging on. I just put new ball joints on that truck a week previous and used lock washers and Loctite on the bolts. There's no reason they should have loosened off that much. Thinking of that still creeps me out. A friend of mine's husband is an on-the-road truck driver, and he told me this story last year. In California, he decided to stop for the night in this diner parking lot. There wasn't much else around, but he thought a hot coffee would feel wonderful. So he hops off the truck, walks in. He's greeted by a beautiful lady named Jackie. She welcomes him, sits him down, and asks if he'd like some pancakes and coffee. He tells her he isn't hungry, and she frowns and brings back some coffee and homemade pie, tells him he needs to eat it. It's the most delicious thing he's ever tasted. Jackie sits down with him and talks for an hour. He realizes she's a special lady. An Elvis song comes on and he asks her to dance. After a couple of slow dances, she hands him a rose. He thanks her and she asks him to come back in before he leaves for hot breakfast. He nods and heads out to his sleeper. He wakes up to a pounding on the window. The sheriff is outside and asks if he's doing all right. He says, "Yes, sir." They get to talking a little, and he tells the sheriff that he's leaving soon after he goes in to say his goodbyes to Jackie. He explains a little about how he really liked her. The sheriff stares at him bewildered and says, "Jackie died 3 years ago." He motions to the diner that is run down and completely abandoned. The driver opens his truck and pulls out the rose he had left on the passenger seat. The sheriff takes a step back and tells him Jackie was known for putting fresh cut roses on the tables. Apparently, 3 men broke into the diner late one night and murdered Jackie during a robbery. The driver had no idea about any of this. For many years after a day of snowboarding, to save accommodation costs, I would drive to the middle of nowhere, away from anyone, and sleep in the back of my 4-wheel drive. One night, I was unusually tired after a huge day and a large meal to aid recovery, anticipating a call of nature, parked within a short walk of a public toilet. So I settle in, fall asleep quickly, but kept getting woken up by the strangest noises. Scraping sounds, with the occasional thud of soft animal-like noises I just could not identify that seemed to be coming from all around the vehicle. After about the 6th time I was woken up, 1 AM, and racking my brain what it could logically be, I came up with the theory that a kangaroo must have got trapped in the toilet cubicle and scratching the hell out of it, desperate to get out, which left me with a dilemma. If I left it there, my disturbance would continue, and I was in no condition to drive to another spot, especially in the dark in freshly fallen snow. Plus, I would have the distressed animal on my conscience. On the other hand, kangaroos can mess you up if they're upset and decide you're to blame in any way, particularly if it's a joey that's stuck and the upset mother is on the outside of the cubicle. Then if the mob is still with it, the males are huge and can also tear you a new one. Laying there, absolutely pitch black night, not even a light in the toilet because it's a national park, I decide to free whatever was trapped in the stall. I load up with layers of coats, 3 pairs of pants, head torch so my hands are free, and grabbed my GoPro stick, the only weapon-like object I had, just in case I was attacked. I have everything at the ready, and get out of the driver's side door and stride towards the toilet. Everything around me moves. What I thought were trees initially, by the light of the interior light activated by me exiting the 4-wheel drive, was a large mob of kangaroos caught completely off guard. My mind primed with the possible danger kangaroos pose, I fumble to turn on the head torch and wildly swing the GoPro stick, swearing my arse off, my mind overwhelmed by the sound of equally panicked animals all around me. I get the head torch going and see the mob disappear into the bush. Seeing the danger gone, I go check the cubicle. Nothing. I go back to bed, pissed off at kangaroos for messing with my sleep and scaring the hell out of me. Daylight. I wake up and use the toilet. Walking back to the four-wheel drive, I see what had happened. The whole white four-wheel drive that had a healthy coat of 800 kilometers of road grime had almost been completely licked clean by the kangaroos. They must have been after the salt used on the mountain roads to de-ice. My uncle needed to go to this town for business with a friend. It was urgent work, so my uncle desperately searched for any available cab. It was late evening, so there were scarcely any, and almost all of them were reserved. Finally, he managed to find one. However, when my uncle mentioned the destination, the cab driver straight up refused to go, because the route to that town was said to be, quote, bad, as in haunted bad. On top of that, it was drizzling and visibility was quite bad. Anyway, after much insistence and an offer to pay 3 times the fare, the driver relented. As soon as they were halfway there, the ride was going well, when suddenly the driver pulled up in front of a bridge. My uncle asked the driver what was going on. When he asked him to be quiet, a car appeared, its 2 headlights shining through the fog, and it stopped a few meters away. Then the car opened, and a man stepped out and walked to the edge of the bridge. He took out a cigarette and started smoking, and stood there by the railing for a few minutes. Then he got back inside his car, and then it happened. My uncle and his friend had no idea what was going to happen. After the man got inside his car, there was a brilliant flash, and my uncle had to cover his eyes for what felt like a long time. When he opened them, he saw the car in front of them up in flames. It had been struck by lightning, and they could hear the man inside screaming while being burnt alive. Just as my uncle tried to open the door to help the man out, the driver commanded him to sit still and not move, and he did the same, because the driver seemed to know what he was doing. And then the car rolled along on its own, back down the path it came from, and disappeared from view. After it was over, the driver explained to them that this was a common sighting, and that's why he stopped the car in front of the bridge. The man was on his way somewhere and had pulled up on the bridge to smoke a little, but then he got back in his car, lightning struck and killed him right there and then. He said that what they saw was actually the ghost replaying his death to the spectators. I'm a female. My friends and I were taking a road trip from Arizona to California. We decided we wanted to go before sunrise, and we left about midnight. We were about 3 hours in, but my car needed gas, and the girls and I wanted to stop and toke up. We had a considerable amount of weed in the car, and we wanted to get rid of all of it before our drive back. So we start to roll one in this poorly lit gas station. We were just about to take a hit when this guy comes running up to my car and starts to pound on the driver's side window. I rolled it down just enough to talk to him, but not enough for him to force entry into my car. He seemed scared and shaken up, but something didn't seem right. He was sweaty, and I could tell he was looking inside my car for something. At first, I thought he was an undercover cop, and my heart was racing. However, he said he had some car trouble and asked if we could take a look at it. At this point, it was 3 a.m. and had not gotten gas yet. I knew nothing of cars, and neither did any of the ladies. We told him this, and I told him I could call a tow for him, although he persisted on using my phone. The other girls were freaking out, and of course, I was too. I could see a payphone by the vending machine at the gas station and told him I would slip him a few quarters through the crack of the window so he could call whoever he would like. Out of nowhere, his tone changed. He got really calm and looked me dead in the eye. He told me to unlock the door. My eyes darted towards the direction of his car, and we could see two other males pacing while one male was sitting in the driver's seat. I noped the hell out of there, told him to go screw himself, rolled up the window, and hopped right back on the highway. I know for a fact, if we had gotten out of the car, we would have never been seen again. I called the police to report him and asked to be notified if there was an arrest made. I never heard back. Arizona is #1 for sex trafficking. Be safe out there, ladies and gentlemen. It was maybe 2014 or 15. I was 17 or 18 at the time. I worked at Target in Springfield, Illinois, and lived in Franklin. If anyone knows where Franklin is, I'll genuinely be surprised. It's about a 45 to 60-minute drive, mostly through long rural roads. The longest stretch is between New Berlin and Alexander, both towns no one has heard of. It's a 2-lane road, so you can pass, but you better get your car back in the right lane eventually. I just gotten a CD, Fall Out Boy, from under the cork tree, and I was listening, and maybe singing along. You have no proof, as I drove my small black car all the way home. The speed limit is 55 miles an hour. I'm going 60, and I'm coming up on this big white semi-truck. I remember him having a trailer, but I don't remember if it was a flatbed or box. He's going slower than me, so I slow myself down to match. By the time I'm doing 45, I realize I'm going to be late home, and Mum's going to be unhappy about that. I have plenty of room, no one's coming, and I can pass him. So I speed back up to 60 and start to go around him, and he starts speeding up too. Now, I know people do that when you pass them. Happens all the time where I'm from, and even happens where I live now. But this was slightly different than that. He was flooring it to keep up with me. This guy wasn't going to let me get in front of him. Fine, I'll just slow down and have to explain to Mum why I'm late. And then, he slows down too. Back and forth, I speed up, I slow down, and he matches me completely. This guy was not letting me back in the right lane. Now, I'm aware that I'm a very stubborn guy, but I had to get back over because I wasn't going to get pulled over for driving in the left lane. And then I saw this truck coming my way. It was a big truck. It's a rural area, so farmers all have mini tanks that they drive around in to transport their equipment, and their sons all have mini tanks they drive around in to compensate for their lack of equipment. I'm assuming he's going 60 as well, which means from 2 miles off, he's going to head-on slam into me in about 1 minute, and the semi will not let me back over. I looked up at the semi-driver, and he smiled at me. It wasn't angry or scary, it was just a big, happy grin, so that creeped me right out. So here I am, about to get into a head-on collision at 60 miles an hour with a truck 5 times my size, because this psychopath to my right won't let me slow down or speed up. I'm 17 or 18. I'm panicking because I've never been through anything like that before. And then my radio gets louder. I didn't turn it up, but maybe I was just hearing it clearer. Maybe it was a miracle, I don't know. But it's "Sugar, we're going down." And we're at the part where he just says, "And sugar, we're going down swinging." To this day, that's my favorite part of the song. If I'm gonna die on that rural road, I'm gonna do it while trying to survive as hard as I could. So I floor it. I push the accelerator down as hard as I can. I discover in that moment that when I feel abject mortal terror, I actually start laughing, which I'm sure is not a bad sign of anything. I got in front of the semi within seconds. If we stopped time, I could have reached out of my window and touched the front of the big red truck that was going to hit me. That white semi was just behind me, with its bumper nearly touching mine. I think I reached about 90 and was another 5 miles down the road before I slowed down and started crying a little bit. Might have screamed. I was freaking out, and adrenaline is a hell of a drug. So it ends there, right? Nope. Semi-dude is right behind me again. He was not respecting the 3-second following distance. He was honking and speeding up, and he nearly bumped me a couple of times. There were several stop signs as I reached Alexander that I just blew right through. Otherwise, he was going to hit me at about 60 or 70 from behind. I'm driving in a tiny car. I would have been smashed like a bug. I think I was doing 40 or 50 when I hung my left turn to get onto the road home, right next to the park in Alexander. Probably should have flipped my car, another miracle I guess, or the fear of the moment has exaggerated the memory. Anyway, I got home, told my parents. Dad asked if I had any details, which I didn't. My mum wasn't upset. Turns out, I made it home in record time. Silver linings? We're from Utah, and when I was 5 or 6 years old, we took a road trip in a rented camper to California. There's this specific area around Nephi, Utah, that had some kind of massacre in the mid-1900s. All I know is that some kind of mass murder occurred out there, and all of the bodies were buried in the desert area off of I-15. Needless to say, it is an eerie part of Utah, and that main highway travel. Anyway, we were on our way back, and I was sitting in the front seat next to my mother. My dad was driving, and we were coming through Nephi, near the massacre area. All of a sudden, my dad starts to get a little panicked and tells my mum to lean over and look into his side view mirror. I did as well. What we saw was the back of the trailer door was flapping open and shut in the wrong direction. To give a visual, the back of the trailer was a single door that opened from the right side and the door hinges were on the left. The door was swinging back and forth, off of the hinges, the completely most impossible way. Freaked out, my dad pulls the trailer over, thinking something was broken. We get out of the trailer off the side of the I-15. It's late evening, the sun is starting to go down, and no cars around. We go through the door and look at it. The hinges were latched and in perfect condition, and the door was latched. We were completely baffled. We knew what we saw, and it made zero sense compared to what we were staring at now. No signs that it was even capable to do that, and no defects. We stood out there for about 15 minutes, rechecking everything. All of a sudden, this green Oldsmobile car pulls up probably 100 yards behind us. We originally thought that someone was stopping to see if we needed any help. These 3 massive Polynesian guys get out of the car. They just stood there for a sec, staring at us. Then they walked to the back of their car, looking at their trunk, as if something was wrong with their car as well. All I remember is that I had the most terrifying feeling arise in my body. I was scared. I looked at my parents to see what they were going to do with the situation. I saw the same look on both of my parents' faces. Fear. Something did not feel right about this situation, and my parents felt it too. My mum whispers for me to get back in the trailer. I ran in there so fast, she wasn't going to tell me twice. I was watching out the window as my dad was trying to hurriedly get everything secured back up. The 3 guys noticed my parents trying to get back to the trailer, and all 3 start marching towards us. My parents ran into the trailer, started it up, and my dad gunned it out of there before the guys could get to the trailer. It was pretty creepy, and I always wondered what would have happened if we hadn't have gotten out of there. I have always thought that something bad would have happened. My ex-girlfriend and I were headed back to our town, 2 hours further up into the mountains from where I grew up, in western North Carolina. There are no interstates that take us all the way home, so a solid portion of the drive is rural. but not abandoned by any means. Most of the highways that take us home are very curvy and constantly changing in elevation, but there are just a couple really long, straightaway patches of road about a mile or so long. Alright, enough backstory. So we're driving home this particular summer night after visiting my family, cruising with the windows open, and rounded the turn onto one of the two straightaways. Another car coming the opposite direction rounds the bend at the other end of this long stretch of road, coming towards us with the headlights on bright. It was getting kind of late, but it's not uncommon to pass other cars on this route, even in the night hours, so I thought nothing of it at first. As we moved towards each other, I dimmed my own lights. The other car did not. Initially I was annoyed and said something to the tune of, "This moron," to my girlfriend, as I proceeded to flash my brights just for a moment as a reminder to the other driver that theirs was still on bright. As we got closer to each other, the other vehicle kept their brights on, and it was getting more and more blinding as they approached, so I signaled a couple more times, still to no avail. As we were about 10 meters away from passing the other vehicle, all of its lights turned completely off. As we passed, there was no whooshing sound of a passing car, nor were there any brake lights to be seen. There was nothing there. Both my girlfriend and I sat in silence for at least the rest of the straightaway before even speaking about what we had just seen. While we're both pretty rational people, I'm more easily convinced about the spiritual and paranormal type experiences that happen to people all the time. While she was a diehard skeptic, she always has an answer to what it probably was instead, not wanting or willing to accept the unexplainable, paranormal stuff that might exist in reality. Even still, she sat speechless as I finally piped up my voice enough to ask a solemn, "You saw that too, right?" Chills ran down both our spines as we went longer and longer trying to find a reasonable explanation when there was none. We'd both seen it, we both saw it shut off, we both saw nothing pass us by. Truly one of the eeriest, uneasiest feelings I've ever experienced. I've travelled this way at night many times since, and have yet to have another run-in with the ghost car, but every time I drive it with just one other car driving towards me, my blood pressure spikes just a little bit.